Welcome to the world of science fiction where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The Xerian warship hovered above Earth's atmosphere like a blade of obsidian, its hull shimmering with bioluminescent veins that pulsed in slow, ominous waves. Inside the UN diplomatic shuttle, engineer Lena Carter adjusted her exosuit's translator, her fingers trembling. She wasn't supposed to be here. But when the lead Senolinguist had collapsed from stress, they'd pulled her, the only person who'd studied Xerian dialectics, from the engine room. "Remember," hissed Ambassador Durand, "compliment their scale patterns. It's like praising a king's crown." Lena nodded, swallowing hard. The shuttle doors hissed open, revealing the Xerian delegation. They stood tall, their iridescent scales shifting from cobalt to crimson as they moved, their four arms folded in ceremonial stillness. At their head stood Zara, the high diplomat, her neural crest, a fan of delicate, glowing tendrils, twitching with curiosity. Lena stepped forward, the translator buzzing in her ear. She'd rehearsed the greeting 100 times, but when she opened her mouth, the device glitched. "Your, scaly skin looks moist today," she blurted. The chamber froze. Zara's crest flared violently, the bioluminescence flashing scarlet, a Xerian sign of mortal insult. The guards behind her unsheathed plasma blades, their hisses echoing like angry serpents. Durand paled. "You just compared her to a swamp reptile." Lena's stomach dropped. First contact was over before it began. The silence in the Xerian throne room was thick enough to choke on. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears as Zara's neural crest slowly settled from furious scarlet back to a simmering violet. The guards hadn't cut her down yet. That was a good sign. "You speak our tongue poorly, human," Zara finally said, her voice like liquid metal, smooth but deadly. "Yet you stand where others would flee. Why?" Lena swallowed. "Because they shoved me in here when the real diplomat fainted didn't seem like the right answer. I didn't mean to offend," she said carefully. "Our translators sometimes fail." Zara's slit-pupilled eyes narrowed. "Failure is not tolerated in the Xerian dominion. Words are weapons. Yours struck like a dull blade, clumsy but still a wound." Ambassador Durand stepped forward, hands raised. "High diplomat, we humbly ask for..." Silence. Zara's middle set of arms flicked outward, a gesture that made the human delegation stiffen. "The human insulted my bloodline. By law, she must face the burning tide." Murmurs rippled through the Xerian court. Lena glanced at Durand. "What's the burning tide?" His face was ashen. "A survival trial in their molten sulfur pits. No outsider has ever survived." The sulfur pits of XR7 were not a place for humans. The air itself burned at 120 degrees, thick with toxic fumes that made Lena's lungs ache even through her filter mask. The ground was cracked black rock, veins of liquid sulfur glowing orange beneath. Zara stood atop an obsidian platform, her scales shimmering in the heat haze. "You will cross the pits," she declared. "If you reach the far platform alive, your insult is forgiven. If not..." She didn't need to finish. Lena tightened the straps of her heat-resistant exosuit, its cooling systems already whining under the strain. The Xerians watched, their expressions unreadable. This wasn't just a punishment, it was entertainment. A deep gong sounded. The trial had begun. Lena stepped onto the first floating stone, barely wider than her boots. Below her, molten sulfur bubbled, its stench making her eyes water. The next stone was 2 meters away, an easy jump under normal conditions. But in this heat, with her suit's joints stiffening, she leaped. Her boot slipped on landing. For a heart-stopping second, she teetered over the edge before catching herself. The collective hiss rose from the Xerians. Disappointment or surprise. Zara's crest flickered. Halfway across, the real challenge began. Geysers of superheated gas erupted without warning, blasting upward like flamethrowers. Lena barely dodged the first, the heat singing her visor. Then her cooling unit failed. A warning flashed on her HUD. Critical-over-8. Her vision swam. She ripped off her helmet, gasping in the poisonous air, and immediately regretted it. Her throat burned. But then, she noticed something. The Xerians were leaning forward, their scales darkening in what looked like concern. Ziara's voice cut through the roar of the pits. She removes her protection. Is this a human tactic? Lena coughed, wiping sulfur from her eyes. No, she rasped. Just bad engineering. A strange sound rippled through the crowd. Laughter. The last platform was 5 meters away, with no stepping stones left. Lena's legs shook. Her skin was blistering, but giving up meant death. She backed up, took a running start, and jumped. For a terrifying moment, she hung in the air, the sulfur lake yawning beneath her. Then her hand slammed onto the far ledge. The Xerians erupted in clicks and hisses, their version of cheers. Even Zira's crest had shifted to a deep blue, a sign of respect. You should be dead, human, Zira said as guards hauled Lena up. Yeah, Lena coughed, grinning weakly. I get that a lot. Lena woke in a sterile, dimly lit chamber, her skin still raw from the sulfur pits. The air here was cooler, filtered, no toxic fumes. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her ribs forced her back down. Your physiology is perplexing. Ziara stood near the doorway, her bioluminescent scales pulsing a soft violet. She held a data tablet, studying it with an intensity that made Lena uneasy. You should be dead, Zira continued. Your species lacks natural heat resistance. Your organs are fragile. Yet you survived. Lena coughed, tasting sulfur still clinging to her throat. Humans are stubborn. Ziara's neural crest flickered, amusement or irritation. Stubbornness does not explain how you endured direct exposure to our atmosphere. Even our weakest warriors would have perished. Lena's eyes drifted to a condensation droplet sliding down the wall. Ziara flinched, just slightly, and stepped back. Interesting. The forbidden question. You don't like water, Lena said slowly. Ziara's scales darkened instantly, shifting to a defensive charcoal. That is irrelevant. It's relevant if your entire species melts in the rain. Lena shot back, then immediately regretted it. Ziara's claws extended, glinting in the low light. For a heartbeat, Lena thought she'd gone too far. Then, to her shock, the Xerian laughed, a sound like grinding crystals. You are either very brave or very stupid, Ziara said. But you are correct. Water disrupts our electrostatic scales. Prolonged exposure is fatal. Lena's mind raced. This was their weakness, a secret worth wars. And she'd just blurted it out. Ziara turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. She tossed Lena a broken cooling unit, the one from her suit. This was not an accident. The device had been tampered with. Wires sliced. A slow, deliberate kill. Who ruled? Commander Krithar, Ziara hissed, her scales flashing crimson. He believes your survival dishonors our traditions. He will try again. Lena's grip tightened on the broken tech. So what now? You lock me up. Execute me quietly. Ziara's crest rippled. No, you will train with me. What? If you are to survive here, you must learn our ways. Ziara's voice dropped. And I must learn yours, before Krithar succeeds. The next cycle, Lena found herself in a sparring chamber, facing Ziara across a mat of woven mineral fibers. The Xerian moved like liquid metal, effortless, precise. Your stance is weak, Ziara criticized. You rely too much on strength, not balance. Lena wiped sweat from her brow. Yeah, well, humans hit harder than you think. Ziara attacked. Lena barely dodged, feeling the wind of claws past her face. She countered with a low sweep, a move Zyara hadn't expected. The alien hissed as she stumbled. For a second, they stared at each other, predator and predator. Then Zyara's scales brightened. Good. That night, as Lena studied Syrian battle tactics on a stolen data pad, the lights flickered. A shadow loomed in her doorway. Krithar. His scales were darker than Zyara's, his crest jagged with scars. "You do not belong here, human," he growled. "Your presence taints our halls." Lena forced herself to stay still. Zyara disagrees. Zyara is softened by curiosity. Krithar leaned closer, his breath smelling of burnt copper. "But when you die in your sleep, even she will not question it." Then he was gone. The alliance forms. Lena found Zyara in the observation deck, staring at the swirling gases of XR7. "He threatened me," Lena said bluntly. Zyara didn't turn. "I know. And if Krithar kills you, I will peel his scales for it." The words were calm. Absolute. Lena blinked. "Why?" Finally, Zyara faced her. "Because you should have died in the pits, but you didn't. That means something." Her crest flickered blue-green. Uncertainty. "I wish to understand what." Lena exhaled. "Then teach me how to fight him." Zyara's claws flexed. "Gladly." The alarms shattered the night. Screams. Plasma fire. The acrid stench of burning metal. Lena bolted upright just as the wall of her quarters exploded inward. She rolled off the bed, shrapnel embedding itself where her head had been seconds before. Through the smoke, figures moved, scales reflecting emergency lights. Zyara's warning echoed in her mind. When he strikes, it won't be a duel. It'll be an execution. A Xyrian warrior lunged through the breach, plasma dagger raised. Lena grabbed the shattered remains of her cooling unit, the one Krithar had sabotaged, and hurled it. The metal struck the attacker's unarmored throat, where the scales were thinnest. The warrior gurgled, clutching at the wound. Lena didn't wait. She sprinted into the corridor, straight into chaos. The Xyrian ship was a war zone. Loyalists and rebels clashed in the narrow halls, their plasma blades turning the air blue with ionized heat. Lena ducked under a wild swing, feeling the searing edge graze her shoulder. Then she saw Zyara. The diplomat was a storm of violence, her four arms moving in a blur as she fought three rebels at once. One lay already sprawled at her feet, scales blackened from a point-blank plasma shot. "Lena." Zyara spotted her, crest flaring emergency crimson. The hangar. Now. A concussion grenade detonated down the corridor. The blast threw Lena against the wall, her vision swimming. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Krithar's voice. "Kill the human. Burn the evidence." Zyara hauled Lena upright, shoving her toward a maintenance hatch. "They've seized the bridge. We can't stay." Lena coughed blood. "Where?" "Vermilion Wastes. Only place they won't follow." The name alone made Lena's stomach drop. The wastes were a toxic desert on XOR7's surface. Acid storms, 200-degree heat, and predators that ate through solid steel. But staying meant death. They dove into the hatch just as a plasma volley scorched the wall behind them. The escape pod crash-landed in a valley of jagged obsidian. Outside, the atmosphere was a sickly orange, swirling with acidic vapors. Lena's exosuit hissed. Its filters were failing. Zyara staggered to her feet, one arm badly burned. "We have 6 hours before the next storm cycle." Lena checked her gear, half a canteen of water, a broken plasma pistol, and a medkit. Against a planet that literally dissolved flesh, it wasn't much. Then she noticed Zyara's injury. The burn wasn't from plasma. It was a chemical wound. "You're hurt," Lena said. Zyara bared her teeth. A rebel had a hydrochloric blade. Coward's weapon. Lena froze. Hydrochloric acid, water-based. If it could hurt Zyara this badly. She looked at her half-full canteen and smiled. Krithar's hunt begins. Above them, Xerian dropship circled like a vulture. They'll send trackers, Zara growled. Krithar won't risk shooting us. He wants your body displayed. Proof humanity is weak. Lina tightened the straps on her broken exosuit. Then let's give him a show. She pulled out the canteen. Zara recoiled. What are you? Improvisation. Lina tore a strip from her suit's lining, soaked it in water, and wrapped it around a shard of obsidian. You said they won't follow us here. Why? Zara hesitated. The storms. Our scales degrade in humidity. Lina hefted her makeshift water blade. Then they'll really hate this. The trackers found them 2 hours later. A trio of Syrian hunters in sealed armor. There, one hissed. Lina let them come. As the first hunter lunged, she dodged, driving her water-soaked obsidian dagger into the gap between his chest plates. The effect was instant. The Syrian shrieked, scales bubbling where the wet blade touched. He collapsed, convulsing. The other two froze in horror. Zara struck like lightning, her claws shredding through the second hunter's respirator. The third turned to flee. Just as the acid storm hit, the sky opened up, a downpour of yellowish liquid that ate through rock. The fleeing tracker screamed as the rain hit his exposed scales, melting them like wax. Lina and Zara huddled under a rock ledge, watching their enemies dissolve alive. Zara's voice was grimly amused. I see why your species fears water now. Lina snorted. Wait until you see hurricanes. The cave was darker than space itself, the only light coming from the faint bioluminescent fungus clinging to the walls. Lina pressed a hand to her ribs, feeling the sharp ache of broken bones from the crash. Beside her, Zara's breathing was ragged. Her scales were still peeling from the acid storm. We can't stay here, Zara hissed. Krithar will send more hunters. Lina flicked on her broken wrist light, the beam flickering weakly. We won't last 5 minutes out there. That storm's still going. Zara's neural crest bristled, but she didn't argue. Then Lina's light caught something unnatural in the cave. Machinery. The deeper they went, the more the cave changed. The walls became smooth, carved by tools, not nature. And then, a sealed door, half buried in rubble. Zara stiffened. This is Xerian military tech. Lina wiped dust off the control panel. Yeah, and it's old. Really old. The door groaned open, revealing a hidden laboratory, one that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Tables were lined with vials of chemicals, some still bubbling faintly. A holographic log flickered in the center of the room. Zara stepped inside, her claws flexing. This shouldn't exist. The High Council banned all research in the wastes after the purge. Lina picked up a dust-covered datapad. What purge? Zara didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the hologram. Xerian scientist, his scales dull with age. Final log entry. The recording crackled. The human DNA samples are resistant, more than we predicted. If the Council discovers we've been testing on them. Lina's blood went cold. You've been experimenting on humans. Zara's silence was answer enough. Krithar's secret weapon. A roar echoed through the caves. Not a Xerian war cry. Something worse. Zara's crest flared in terror. They kept one alive. The ground shook as something massive charged toward them. Lina barely had time to grab a rusted plasma cutter before the creature burst through the wall. It was Xerian, but wrong. Twice as tall as Zara, its scales were blackened, its body grafted with metal. Its eyes were pure white, leaking pale fluid, and it was starving. The beast lunged. Lina dove, rolling under a swipe of its claws. The plasma cutter sparked, barely functional. Zara leaped onto its back, driving her claws into its spine. The creature howled, thrashing. Lina! Zara shouted. The vials. Lina spotted them, rows of chemicals labeled in Xerian script. One stood out. Neurotoxin X9. She grabbed it, uncorked it with her teeth, and threw it straight into the beast's mouth. The creature choked, its white eyes bursting into black veins. It collapsed, twitching. Zira jumped clear, landing beside Lena. That should not have worked. Lena panted, staring at the dead monster. Why? Because humans aren't supposed to survive your toxins. Zira met her gaze. Yes. The lab's main terminal still had power. Lena hacked into it, pulling up files, decades of experiments. Project Hybrid, she read aloud. Objective: create a Syrian soldier immune to water. Test subjects: human prisoners. Zira's claws dug into the console. This was forbidden. After the purge, all research was moved to the wastes. Lena finished. Yeah, real hidden in plain sight move. Zira's crest drooped. The council, they never stopped. A new alert flashed on the screen. Zira hesitated, then answered it. A Syrian admiral appeared, his scales dull with age. Zira, you were ordered to terminate the human. Lena froze. Zira's voice was ice. My mission was observation. Your mission was containment. The admiral snapped. She knows too much now. The transmission cut out. Silence. Then, the distant sound of dropships.